Welcome to the In Betwixt and In Between. This is Leadership Limbo, a podcast aimed at helping middle managers and their supervisors embrace the discomfort and power of leading themselves and others in the midst of it all. We blend real insight with practical tools to help you lead with self-awareness, purpose, and influence wherever you are on your leadership journey. I am one of the co-hosts here and founders of the podcast. Always like saying things like that. John Clark. And with me, as always, my counterpart and my friend and my colleague, Josh Hugo. Mr. Hugo, How are you doing today?
Good. Co-CEO of this podcast.
Co-CEO.
I don't know. Has there ever been a co-CEO?
I know.
Probably not. Acting CEO, interim
I want to
CEO.
be like, how do we get to the point that I'm also putting things like Series B founder or whatever sort of frames those are? You know, we need more investment in our podcast, I think, is the big thing. So
no, I'm good. I got
good.
For our viewers, I got a little stress ball.
Oh, okay.
It's actually my son's Christmas gift. The other two broke because, of course, a ball filled with like glue or goo is something that boys, I think in particularly, love to see how quickly they can destroy it.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, how did all this stuff just come out? I'm like, you were stomping on it and then you were shooting it with sharp objects. And yeah, that's how it breaks. And then you're chucking it across the house. So two of them broke. So I claimed the third.
And now the stress reducing object has just created way more stress is the problem, I find.
Well, yeah, I took it out of the house and put it in my office, or took it out from the upstairs area and I've hid it. So I can use it now.
This is, when I was a teacher and a administrator, for good reasons, kids would often need accommodations around stress things. And good folks help kids to limit and know how to use those. But then sometimes they would get out of control and it was just like kids have them. And so you're just upping the anxiety and stress of the teacher and not reducing it for anyone because there's things zooming and buzzing and throwing around the room and breaking apart and all sorts of stuff. And
my anxiety drone.
It's like the thing meant to help us is no longer helping us, or at least the teacher. But I'm also curmudgeon-y and crotchety and things like that. So that could have a lot to do with it. Well, good stuff. Way to go. I'm glad you have the stress ball. I hope it doesn't break on you today.
I hope not.
But we're real excited to get going here. What's that?
That would cause more stress.
I know. None of that. Real quick, just want to remind folks to subscribe and share our podcast, download our podcast wherever you get those. Give us a 5-star review if you would like. Leave some comments. We'd love to do that. And then, again, I said this already, but sharing broadly with folks and just giving them access to it. And again, I think the biggest thing we'd like to push for is just for people to engage with us, share their thoughts, send a text, send an email, anything we can use, anything you want us to say, we'd love to bring it on here. And with that, I want to turn it to Josh. We've had some really great episodes lately, some really great things we've discussed. And so Josh is going to give us a little bit of frame for where we've been and jump us into where we're going. So I'll send it to you, Josh.
Thanks, John. Yeah, a couple of episodes have lapsed since we've checked back in on our homework. Since last week, we had a great conversation with Andrew Robinson. But a few weeks ago, we had I think, a pretty in-depth conversation about the role of influence and how to create it and how to operate with influence. And it led us to really think a lot about walls of self-preservation. So what are you afraid of losing? What are you trying to prove? What are you potentially hiding, right? What are you fearful of? Those types of things that get in our way of truly creating relationship with others. We asked folks to think about. And John, I know you actually had a pretty vulnerable post that you shared with the World Wide Web the other day. Tell me more about how your own reflections from our podcast led you to think a little bit about this with your own life.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, the reason I want to bring this up is twofold. One, these things exist outside of the work world, right? We talk a lot about management here, but good management and good management skills relate to all aspects of our lives, we believe. Second, I think Josh and I are always interested in kind of doing this conversation so we can build it within ourselves as well. Like we have learned about it. We've seen people do it well, but we continue to adjust, right? So I shared this example where my son is 6 and he's playing on a basketball team for the first time and has had a few practices. He's done really well. He's played other sports before, but the day of the basketball game came and he just did not want to play. He was refusing. He was saying, I'm not going to play. He was worried about it in the morning. And then we got to the game. We collectively had forgotten an undershirt for his jersey. So that was upsetting him. But the main thing here is I am like a very, no, we have to put in the effort. If we're going to say something, we have to do it. We're a team player. Be out there with your team. Now, mind you, the other 7, 6, and 7-year-olds did not care if Ian played or not. But nevertheless, I'm very team oriented and no, you have to do your part for the team. And instead of kind of how can we adjust through this, I was, basically talking about him as being defiant and not a team player and not trying. And that upset him even more. He doubled down. He said, well, I am mad at you now and I'm not going to play and I never want to play basketball ever again. We got him to sit on the bench, but with his mom, he came up into the stands. I wasn't yelling, but I was definitely disappointed and it wasn't helping. And I realized afterwards in some reflection and what Ian was doing here, he had walls of self-preservation up. He was scared. He was worried about being out publicly, people seeing him play a game for the first time. He's very competitive. So the idea of not doing something well bothers him. So rather than asking him, hey, what are you worried about? Can we do this one thing to make it better? you know, I doubled down on, well, you're just a quitter, basically. I didn't say it quite that way, but it's kind of like that. And anyway, so a lot of reflection on that. The next week, I was going to take him to basketball again. It was just me because Meg had the other 2 kids doing something. And I decided this week, okay, heed your own advice. He had already kind of said, I don't think I want to play. And I just said, hey, what's the thing that's worrying you? He's like, I just don't know how much I like it, or I'm worried I won't do well. I said, okay, well, what if we were using some, like, I promised him a Gatorade if we went to the game. So there's a little bit of carrot here. But eventually it was, okay, well, why don't you sit on the bench with your coach? And I said, if you don't want to play, that's fine. Just let your coach know that you're going to sit and watch your teammates. And he did that. And the coach is really great too. He's kind of, I'm staying out of the way. So it's not about me. It's about him and his coach and his teammates. He starts working with them and eventually he gets into the game. So this slow play allowed him to do it because he had seen others do it. His coach was encouraging him and you could physically see like he's less tense. That wall of self-preservation comes down. He gets out there, he tries it and he loved it. He wanted to play the whole second half, right? He's excited for the next one. So
Nice.
I know we often do too many examples, all of us probably with kids of how work life and how we lead our kids is part of that. But man, it was just such an explicit view of this for me and how I failed miserably at dealing with the wall of self-preservation at first, but there was still that opportunity to adjust the way I helped him to eventually have some success
Yeah.
here. So it was cool.
Good story.
It's really fun. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder how much you both had walls of self-preservation up.
Yeah, for sure. Good point.
Yeah.
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 What do you think my walls of self-preservation were in that moment?
I think potentially, like, you might be fearful that your values of, like, teamwork and, like, "Oh, I'm the parent whose kid can just quit in front of all these other people, and I
Yeah.
need to emphasize, like, this is what we believe in," right? Like, I've been there. That same story existed for my younger son when he was 6 years old on his soccer team,
Yep.
literally. First day of practice, same thing. So, yeah, it's really requires the mirror. And I think today's conversation is going to, like so many conversations about leadership and
Yeah.
development and management,
And,
require that mirror.
and to your point, in that moment, we talked about this a few weeks ago. The thing that had to be adjusted first was my own wall. Like I had to get over whatever my
Yeah.
ego was or the feeling I had about what values am I instilling in my kid long term and how he's going to work on teams and with others. And as Meg told me at one point when I said something like this, she goes, "John, he's 6.
Yeah. What are you
He's
trying to
6."
prove? Right. What are you trying to prove? Right.
Like I go, I know, but if we don't do it now, he'll be 30 and everyone will hate him. And it's
Yeah.
stupid.
Yeah.
But so the first thing I had to do was get over my own ego, my own like what am I trying to figure out for myself here through my kid and allow us just to work together to help him have some success. And he did. So I think
Yeah.
you're right. So the first thing that had to come down was my wall because I was in control of that. Like
Hmm.
we are as managers sometimes more so than our employees are. So
Yeah.
I like that. So
Yeah.
cool.
Thanks for bringing that story
Yeah.
in.
No,
I
it's
think
been
it's
fun. It
really
was
good.
fun to kind of think through that.
Well, transitioning a little bit to today's topic is building from last week. If you're just listening to this episode, I know a lot of folks jump around podcast episodes, but if you didn't listen to the podcast last week with Andrew Robinson, we highly encourage you to do that.
Yeah.
Really excellent conversation. Andrew's a really smart dude and has some really great insights, and we enjoyed it. One of the things that we talked about last week came to this concept of presence. And it was brought out through the conversation about really thinking about management differently and the importance of maybe even repurposing the concept of it towards development and the importance of being for others. And so without rehashing everything from last week, we want to jump into the concept of presence today. And there's a good chance that this conversation goes over the course of a few different episodes because I think it's an important concept to think about in leadership. We often hear it under this phrase of executive presence. And I think we're not necessarily diving into that concept explicitly around executive presence today, but it absolutely is a topic of significance in the world of leadership and
Also
management.
weird that I think maybe I'm wrong on what it is that we have to come up with a frame for executive presence because presence in of itself, I guess, is not good enough. Anyway, continue.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
I wanted to start with when John and I talked about this. This is actually really timely for a number of reasons. One of which is I'm going to be releasing another blog post in the next week or so about presence, which we hadn't talked about, John and I hadn't talked about prior to that decision to write about it. And then John brought this out today. And then a few weeks ago, I listened to David Whyte, an Irish poet, writer, essayist, speak to the concept of presence. So I actually wanted to start with a passage from his essay called Time. So here we go. Whatever the version of time we have arranged for ourselves, time always feels like a powerful gravity, a pull to our senses, always drawing us toward a clock, toward an appointment, toward a sense that something should be happening now, whether it is actually possible or not. Time is intimately connected with gravity. Astonishingly, physicists tell our disbelieving ears that everything gravitates towards places where time moves more slowly. And time seems to move more slowly the greater the mass to which it is near. The greater the gravity, the greater the slowing down of time. So that to our amazement, someone living on a mountaintop ages more quickly than their neighbors down in the valley. What physicists call mass, we could call presence. I'm going to say that sentence one more time. What physicists call mass, we could call presence. And as in a human life, presence is invitational. Presence invites others. Presence is towards it. Presence slows time down and opens up possibilities of experiencing the timeless and the eternal. The depth, amplitude, and invitational nature of my presence slows time for everyone around me. Timelessness is the foundation of all real charism and charisma. By creating a centered, timeless presence, I invite everyone unconsciously to make the choice to join me there. Or should they be afraid of what might happen in that slow, spacious territory of possibility, run 100 miles in the opposite direction? I thought that was a really beautiful conveyance of time, but also the importance of reflecting on presence.
Hmm.
And I thought a lot about this idea of the movie with Matthew McConaughey, John. It's when he's in outer space and he
Yeah. Interstellar.
Interstellar, beautiful movie, and he gets pulled into this universe that has a deep black hole, and time slows down dramatically, and they age
Hmm.
very quickly relative to time on Earth. All of that being said, the nature of time slowing down in this physical sense, because it's getting closer to mass, and David Whyte analogizes that mass to our presence. And when
Yep.
we are living and operating with presence, time slows down for those people around us and for ourselves. And I think that just made so much sense.
Yeah. No, you've done a few things with David White, and I'm going to look into him more, but I appreciate, for folks out there, I always find value in when you find yourself, drawn to a person's art or a person's way of thinking, like I think Josh is doing with David White currently, and we've all done, use that to, help frame the way you're thinking and how you're
Mm.
kind of thinking about, topics of leadership or topics of life. And I think what I like about this too, Josh, is we talk about how that presence slows time down. And I think paradoxically, it speeds it up at the same time. Like when you are present, you almost lose track. It's like you forget
Correct.
time. I guess is what it's more like. You forget time. It creates flow. It
Right.
creates, um, I hate to use the word, but like a synergy between things that just allows them to flow
Yep.
together. And so, we're gonna talk about a little bit about presence, but actually, when you make yourself fully present to someone, the result of that is it slows things down for them, the way they're thinking, the way they're communicating with you, how they're feeling like you're going about solving problems. And ultimately, because of that, we get to an end state where we say, oh, we actually got there a lot quicker than I thought we were because we got rid of that tension. We got rid of that need to prove. We got rid of the barriers or the walls of self preservation that we've put up in a way that I think presence allows for that. Right. And
Yeah.
so it's not a slowdown of time that feels like it's dragging. It's a
No.
slowdown of time that feels like I didn't even know it
Where did it
existed
go?
anymore. Where did it go?
Wow.
So
How
yeah,
you've been here for 3 hours, or this meeting, I can't
yeah,
believe is already wrapped up. Like,
yeah,
you're losing that sense of the clock ticking. I think
yeah,
that's what we're getting at,
totally.
presence.
Yeah. And so I think we want to start by, framing this a lot in that beautiful poem there or that part of a poem. And we want to define presence in the general sense in one way. Like, what do we mean about this generally? What can it mean for us as managers and leaders as well? So actually, I'll turn to you, Josh. I'd like to get your thoughts on when you think about presence.
Mm.
What's it mean? And again, this part of it doesn't have to be purely about you as a manager, but us as people. Certainly, if that slips into, if you have a way of transitioning to that, how it's a little different when you're leading or managing, that's great too.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. I mean, I think that we wanna draw this towards being very practical, but I also wanna start with, it's almost one of those things you just know, right? When that person walks into a room and they just command, not out of fear, although I think it's important to name that presence can exist in multiple different forms, from healthy to unhealthy. And there can be
Sure.
a dominating presence that
Yeah.
walks into a room because you're afraid of them, and not for good reasons, not like an awe, like AWE fear, but like, oh gosh, I'm really worried about this person could do something really bad. That
Yeah.
is a form of presence. But what we're really getting at is the idea of like the awe that somebody might feel when you walk into a room, that's just palpable sense.
Yeah.
I think when I was thinking about a definition or some of the ways to define presence, I go back to a concept that we introduced months ago, and it's not my own, but it's that 100x leader, that leader who is truly healthy with themselves. We thought about that peace index, the idea of like the different parts of my life are in good working order so I can truly be here for you.
Yeah.
And I think a leader who can walk in and is there to just be with you, they are there to listen, to understand, to not just like, it's not as the therapist sort of presence, but like, that they're not working through their own stuff in their head while they're sitting across from you, but they're truly there with you. And I think that that concept, that ex leader, the one whose health is strong and is there to multiply others, jumps out as a really immediate definition of presence in my mind.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, I like that. I really liked, yeah, to your point, and we'll talk about what presence is not to us, at least in the way we're talking about it. But you're right.
Yeah.
Like, I think there is a presence that is more of like domination, right? Of dominance, I would say. So I'm almost like, man, I want a different word than that because the presence is the ability. I think when you're present in the way that we're talking about, you are all around. You are aware. You are allowing yourself to like just kind of like be be around everyone and within. And when you're present in the way of like I'm coming to dominate this, it has like singular focus. You're in a line, right? Like there's shapes to this for me. Like when you're really present, you kind of exist in a bubble or a circle. When you're present in the way of domination, it's about a straight line to get something I
Mm,
want. So, I don't
mm,
know. It's something I was just thinking about. But I think
right.
I have a couple quotes and I've read from this book before, but as we were talking about this today, I knew that David Brooks really talked about presence in his book, How to Know a Person. A while back, we talked about the idea of accompaniment for illuminators is really important. And in that same section, I'm going to read a couple quotes. So bear with me. They're not terribly long, but so he writes, finally, a person who is good at accompaniment understands the art of presence. Presence is about showing up at weddings and funerals, and especially showing up when somebody is grieving or has been laid off or has suffered some setback or humiliation. I think this is really important. When someone is going through a hard time, you don't need to say some wise thing. You just have to be there with heightened awareness of what they are experiencing at that moment. And so the next quote, here you go, Josh. This is David Whyte. He quotes David Whyte here in his
No.
book, Installations. I did not realize that until we were talking about this just now. The ultimate touchstone of friendship is not improvement, neither of the other nor of the self. The ultimate touchstone is witness, the privilege of having been seen by someone, and the equal privilege of being granted the sight of the essence of another, to have walked with them and to have believed in them, sometimes just to have accompanied them for however brief a span on a journey impossible to accomplish alone. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
this episode is brought to you by David Whyte.
Yeah. Check him out. Really, seriously, he's a
So,
beautiful poet.
I like those because, and this is before we get into management, and I think the one thing about management is we do toe this line of you're working for your organization and you're getting to outcomes, and yet I find if we frame it in the idea of like I am accompanying my people along this journey to help us get to whatever we're trying to achieve, it creates like such a better condition for how people work and how they relate to
Mhm.
each other. And I think you can do that without losing sight of the realistic fact that we have metrics to hit and we have goals to make, right? And so I think I just think it's incredibly important to think about that presence is about the accompaniment of others. I love the idea that it's not so I can share some wisdom with you necessarily, or I can prove a point, or I can fix it for you, but just to be here with you in that moment. And I think we've talked about in a lot of ways around being the hero or the victim or lots of things. True presence isn't about like solving the problem for someone. It's not about being the villain to them to say, well, if I push them hard enough, they'll just do it. But it's saying, I get you, I understand you, let's travel this together, right? That's what presence is. And certainly within that happens dialogue where we find solutions and we find other opportunities, but ultimately the idea of doing it together and accompanying each other along the way. So yeah, so those are a few things. I mean, there's lots of what this is. I mean, I'm just gonna hit on a couple of these. I think deep listening is really important of this. And I talked about this on a podcast I joined the other day. I think like setting the framework with a goal for folks, especially people like me who don't deep listen well enough, to find a way to keep it where I'm listening to understand, not listening to respond. I even think about that a lot on this podcast. Am I listening to Josh or do I catch something he says and I'm like waiting for my turn to slip in because I want to make a point? That makes for good podcasts sometimes, but
Mhm.
the idea is, am I listening fully, taking that in, and then responding or asking further questions about that? Josh, I know interested or interesting as a concept, something you've talked about with us. How does that fit in with deep listening in your eyes as well?
I think it's just another expression of it.
Yeah.
If you're always thinking about what you need to say next, how much can you truly be interested in what somebody else is saying? And so much of I mean, this ties to where we're going to go with some of this discussion today. And I'm already looking at our time. Like this is going to be a couple of, I think, good conversations, I think, because there's a lot to discuss here. But I think the idea of interesting means that you're trying to convey what's important to you, but less about what's important to them. And I think that taps into lots of things, the anxiety of like, ooh, if I don't come across as smart enough after this, or if I don't say something here, I'm fighting for my worth and it's self-preservation. So I don't know that there's a whole lot more to say beyond what you've already shared, John, is like deep listening it's not just a physical exercise. It's literally like what are you doing? Like, what are you doing right now, John, as I'm talking, right? Like, are
Yeah.
you sitting here thinking about what we should say next? Are you thinking about, I'm just really curious what Josh has to say. And maybe a brief pause after somebody speaks is not the worst thing. As a manager, as a leader,
Mhm.
how often are you comfortable with that, that silence,
Yeah.
that discomfort of silence? And if you're not, it's not easy to be comfortable with it. What's going on there, right?
Yeah.
We can start really peeling back layers of the onion with this particular topic in general.
Yeah. And I think whether it's the Brooks quote or the David White quote, you hear a lot of this about awareness of others, right? Deep care for them, understanding how they contribute, walking that path with them. I think in some sense too, it's a lot that we're talking a lot about like presence with people. I think it's also just in presence within like, what am I doing here? Like super awareness of this. I remember a long time ago, Josh, on one of our podcasts, I always love this little clip of you, but you said this idea, we have 100 priorities where we have 15 priorities with 10 sub bullets for them, and nothing ever is a priority, and you go, we do too much, right? And I think the person who operates with real presence also has the discipline to say, what is necessary of me right now? What is the most important thing we can achieve right now? Whether that's in a meeting, whether that's when you're setting your weekly priorities, but you have the presence of mind to say, I can't be everywhere and do all things at once. Great leaders know what needs our most focus right now, and can we and like, if we focus on that, what has to be sacrificed because of that. So presence is also this idea of just how do I, you know, prioritize myself and prioritize my team and give us permission to let some things go, because we can't do, as you said, Josh, we do too much. Someone who's truly present focuses intently on not doing too much, right? And so I actually
It's
think
very
that's maybe a good,
countercultural. I mean, sorry, just to
yeah,
jump in, I think
right, right.
it's very countercultural, at least in particularly the Western culture we live in, is we're driven by a lot of external requirements and deadlines and factors that really keep us constantly in motion. It goes back to some of our very identity as a country. This isn't meant to be some like larger commentary on like economic systems or otherwise, but I do think culture makes it difficult to say, okay, this is great, guys, but like, when are we going to get shit done? Right. And I think that temptation to always move towards the next thing is just built into so much of our culture. And so
Yeah.
operating with presence is there's some opposing gravitational fields pulling us
Oh
in
yeah.
different directions, right? Like there's this spiritual, soul-based draw towards real presence, this gravitational field that David Whyte talks about. And then there's this other like societal, cultural gravitational field pulling us towards a different kind of not presence, but almost the anti-presence of needing to kind of click out of this zoom out space that we're in and then get to the work. And I think that it creates a false dichotomy between work and the work. And I just am naming that because the work of creating presence can't just be we flip a switch, you listen to this podcast, you check off some boxes, and you can become more present. It is a nonstop internal dialogue and nonstop internal exercise, I think, towards becoming more present more often because it's really difficult to do it.
Yeah, I mean, let's jump that into, well, what is this not? And I think this can show up
Yeah.
in practical, and we can toe the line between kind of big picture thinking and how we live our lives, but also some practical things in terms of how people leave. Like, what is not
Totally.
presence? Like, let's start with you. Like, what is not being a present person, or exhibiting presence in our life? Like, what is that not?
Yeah, I think that it could be a mistake to say that presence is just because you have a title, that you have positional authority, that when you have that, like you can just come in and assume people will follow you because you have positional authority. I think that is an
Sure.
unhealthy
Yeah.
way of thinking about presence is like, well, if I have just more stature in the company, or if I have a
Mhm.
higher title, or I have a bigger role, that alone will create greater presence. And I don't believe it does.
Yeah, charisma and gravitas, right, sound good, and often big things we say about leaders, and certainly think there's a place for having a magnetism, that draws people to you, a charisma that gets some influence. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. And to confuse that with like presence and understanding of others and understanding of what we need in this moment, it would be a mistake, right? And
Mm.
so when you're a leader, if you're a particular leader who is particularly charismatic or just has a lot of pull, don't lose that. But man, make sure you're thinking through, is that actually creating the conditions for me to be present to the needs of others and the needs of this team, or am I actually like repelling people to a certain degree? So
Can we sit on that just for a brief
sure.
second too? I
Yeah.
picture a lot of charismatic leaders and some who are very present and have a great presence. But how many charismatic leaders, and I'll put myself in this at some points in my career, I tend to lead more with charisma at times, are like really compelling when they're talking. And then the moment you respond, they're just giving you that 30,000-foot stare. Like they've said what they
Right.
needed to say. They've played their cards, and you are just like an afterthought, right? That could be
Yeah.
somebody who's considered charismatic, but that is a person lacking presence. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of leaders who are thinking about being interesting versus being interested can be
Right.
charismatic, but then you look at them and you're like, bro, I don't, cool. This was a great handshake moment. I met this person and it looks good on Instagram, but that's not a leader that you would actually want to work for. I think
Yeah.
we've probably worked with some people or know some people who operate with that charismatic personality, but don't have presence. I think
Yeah.
it's a great point, John. They don't go hand in hand.
Yeah. Or the number of times that you have something big to share with your team and you spend a lot of time thinking of the perfect framing and the quote to go with it and all this stuff. And then you do that, but you're not spending enough time of how am I drawing people into understanding how they feel about this is a perfect example that they might, once you're done, they might be like, wow, he sounds real convicted about this. He's really passionate about it. That's great. Um, but then when they realize that, oh, you were just there to deliver a speech, then you kind of lose them within about 30 minutes after it, right? When the harsh reality of
Yeah.
like, what are we doing here hits them. So I would say another one, physical proximity for presence is not the same. So, well, I want to be more present to my people. So I'm going to set up more time with them, more one to ones, maybe more time with my team. Like, oh, we need time to really hash out all of these things. Again, that's better than I suppose that, you want time with your team and with your people, not just spending your time running around putting out fires or whatever. And that sort of thing, if not taken into the mind of like, what are we doing here and how does this support the person I'm meeting with or how does this support the team? You know, if it's just a way for you to ultimately deliver messages or to ensure that you're checking in on everyone and you call that presence, then that's a
Right.
challenge,
I'm
right?
glad you
I
said
mean,
that last part.
and recently I've been reading some stuff from a place called Workplace. You and I are kind of partners on their website. Essentially, we in our coaching would maybe suggest tools for people that they do, which are cool. But one of the cooler things they do is the think pieces they put out a lot about
Mm.
management. And one of the things that he's been talking about and other folks that write for them have been writing about is the purpose of the one-to-ones and overcommitting to things and doing too much. It's actually the idea of how do we create, if we're going to have a meeting or if we're going to meet with someone, does that meeting, one, help us to achieve a new outcome, make a decision and define ownership for that? And if it doesn't do those things, then what's the point of the meeting? Well, it's just to check in on things, right? And I suppose you might want to do those things, but that should be done shorter than lengthy meetings with your whole team. And so I think sometimes we think presence is where we all get together, we get to share all the things we're doing. In some ways, that eliminates the presence we have with folks because it's just about communicating what we're doing versus defining ownership and then entrusting people to go there. And then eventually, when I meet with you, we're going to talk about the challenges you're having in doing that and walk that path together. Right. So,
Yeah.
meetings need to happen. I even think team check ins and standing huddles are fine. So I don't want to get rid of that. But I am saying, do your meetings and their structures create the conditions for true presence and understanding and walking a path together? Or do they create a way where it's just, tactical and transactional? That's the word I'm looking
Yeah,
for.
I mean, if you're just always around, like, don't mistake presence literally just means being visible. Now, I
Yeah.
will say being visible is an important part of being present, right? If you're a leader who's only showing up when things go south, then
Yes.
that's not great presence. That's a good example of a non-example of presence. But if you are always visible, but you're always visible and jumping in to either micromanage or just give critical feedback, or like, oh, when Josh is around, it always means that something is going to come out from this that doesn't feel supportive of my development, but it's just like a nagging criticism sort of space. That's not like an over your shoulder sort of presence, is not good presence just
Yeah.
because you're around. So I do think that the physical piece of presence needs to be looked at critically and not just assumed to be, well, if I'm visible, I'm present.
Yeah.
It's You have to dig down again to the layers behind your intentions of being around and what are you doing when you are physically in contact with other people. So I think
Yeah. And that
the
gets us to
physicalities and the
what something presence is, I think, is presence is curious and it's exploratory and it's, trying to learn, right? To your
yeah,
point, I think a lot of people are physically around a lot. They're in people's spaces, but the type of presence they're providing again is that dominance. Like, I'm here to fix something. I'm here to see what's wrong. I'm here to make sure things don't go off the rails versus I'm here to learn how people do things.
yeah,
I'm here to ask questions about things I see. I'm here to celebrate things. I am here to give feedback at times. Those are all fine, but it's more of a variety of your presence because you are ultimately bringing a curiosity to that and a learner's mindset than
yeah,
it is, I'm here to fix some stuff. Right.
right.
Um, I think we got one or two more here, but I do want this one.
Go
I
for
think
it.
this is an important one. The oversharing of your own problems. Um,
Right.
this over indexing on my vulnerability as a leader, I think is presence. People think about that as presence as I'm connecting with people, I'm sharing with them, I'm allowing them to see my vulnerability. I think there's ways to do that. Don't get me wrong. And I think the idea of letting people behind the curtain a little bit, you don't want to wall yourself off from others. But sometimes as leaders, we overemphasize that in sometimes as a villain to the or victim, sorry, as a victim standpoint of, hey, like I want to be vulnerable with you guys. So I'm gonna tell you all the things I'm doing, how hard it is for me. And it takes some good coaching and some good ways to learn how to do that effectively. But sometimes it just puts stress onto other people,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't make it feel like you're walking the path together. And again, I think you can do that and be vulnerable and share with people and help them to get behind the walls a little bit and see what's going on so they can understand the challenges you're facing or the company's facing. But if it's just for the sake of getting them to feel bad for you versus like, let's work through this together, then that's not really presence either, is what I was thinking about here as well.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes back to that formula of if if it's about you as opposed to about others, your presence is being compromised.
And I would even say not even just others, but about us. I think that's what presence is like, this is about us, including me in that, but it's not about me, and it's
Hmm,
not just about
yeah.
you, it's about us to a certain degree.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting us as yes, us as much as each of you have been able to independently define what you need from the other
Yes.
instead of assuming what you need from that other person, right? And like us and we is a real thing as long as I've defined what I need from you, John, and John, you have defined what you need from me. Now we have an us unit. I think presence to that kind of build on that is a non-example would be me assuming what you need and like letting that speak for like I'm here for you but I actually haven't listened, right? So it goes back to that idea of listening and being
But that's
interested in what
but
somebody
that's
else.
why I think that's why us is the better thing when I'm only about you, then what happens sometimes is if I get us as a team to think about us and how we work together and understanding each other and how we walk this path together versus he knows I'm focusing on me, I'm going to tell him what I need because I've been in that situation where I'm focused on the other, but I'm not combining that with like what's the right thing for the organization or me or
Correct.
us
Yeah,
together.
both are important. I
So
agree.
I just would hesitate. Don't think you have the only way to do this is only to be like, what's this is for the other, right?
Self-sacrifice is not present.
Yeah. Again, the hero
Self-sacrifice is
mentality
not
is not
present.
good either.
Right. That's right.
Anyway,
That's a good
it's
call out.
I mean, we're getting a lot into pronouns and us and you and them and all that. So it's
And we started with David Whyte, so this
that's
already
true. I know.
we're on another level
Yeah.
with this one, I think in a good way, but yes. John, why don't you close out with maybe one more of these, and then we'll wrap for today.
I think there is this balance sometimes that presence is too much about tiresome collaboration to the point of stagnation and paralysis. Presence doesn't mean like we don't make decisions or
Oh, that's your present.
we don't understand what our goals are. We don't know what we're trying to achieve. We don't work on timelines. It's not just some, you know, we exist in the universe and what is time and we do whatever we want. We still have to operate on timelines and things. And so over collaboration, not being willing to make tough decisions, not willing to put your like kind of stake in the ground to be like, all right, team, here's where we're going. People need that too. They want to be led. So don't confuse this with, hey, don't ever assert
Right.
yourself or the needs of the team. It's just saying there's a method to go towards it. So you're not doing that in a way that's just cutting people off. Once they know, like, okay, he has or she has my best intent in mind. We've worked together. We walk this path together, but now I'm ready to go based on where we need to go collectively. Let's go. That's
Yeah,
a lot different. So I
I
just don't want
agree.
to confuse people. Don't let this be something that leads to paralysis or this feeling that you can't move forward or you can't make decisions. Right.
Agreed. I
Yeah.
think people with that we know carry presence can confidently listen and confidently make decisions.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Cool.
really, really good stuff. John, do you want to hit the homework for next week and
Yeah.
help
So
close this out?
great conversation. And we're going to pick this up next week with a little bit more of what gets in the way of our presence, like really talking about helping people to see the things that get in our way and some strategies for achieve it. But for today, I think we just want to have you sit in this idea of presence. And so today's homework is maybe just a little bit more self reflective. What do I have to do to make sure I'm more present to my team or more present to our current like the current needs of myself, the organization, and so on. So for some people, that might just be ground yourself in the main priority you need to focus on and do everything you can to schedule your week to be present for that. Okay. For others, it might be, I have been too focused on all the things happening around me that I haven't been present to my teams. I haven't been listening to them. I haven't been asking the right questions.
Yeah.
So if you're those folks, pick a person that you're saying, I'm going to be present to them through true questioning, through true understanding, through deep listening on a challenge they're facing or a challenge we're facing that we can figure out together. So whether
I
it's
like that.
priorities or people, find a spot where you need to be more present and consciously and deliberately focus on that this week. Okay.
Love that.
And we're going to pick up this conversation more in the future, and we're excited to do that with y'all.
Yeah. And maybe just a very tiny addition is the assessment of that homework is, does time slow down for you and that
Yeah,
person as you're doing it?
exactly.
So thank you for joining us this week. Until next time, this has been Leadership Limbo, where we make space for the tension and tools for the journey. See you in the in-between.